Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
We'll start the 7th parak in Mitzvah Hashem, which is Elu Nemorim. And the Mishnah is going to address the issue of various recitations and whether they have to be recited in Lashon Kodesh or they can be recited in any language. So Elu Nemorim B'chol Lashon. The following list includes those that could be read in any language, and you don't need Dafka Lashon HaKodesh. And the Gemara later on is going to derive the origin from which we derive each of the following. Number one, Parshas Sotah. So the Kohen has to be mashbia the woman, the Sotah, before she drinks the Mayim Morim, and he can do so in any language that she understands. Next is Vidui Maser. On the 4th and 7th year of the Shemitah cycle, after a person was Makayim his Chovos, what's called Bir Masros, and he took out all the Matanos that are Shayach, and he no longer is holding on to anything that has to be given. For example, Meiser Rishon has to be given to the Levi, Meiser Ani to the Ani, Meiser Sheni has to be brought up to Yerushalayim. After he fulfills all these mitzvos, then he recites a vidui. It's a very strange kind of vidui, and it's not a confession of sin, but on the contrary, it's just the opposite. It's really a statement on his part that he has fulfilled all his obligations. And it's probably called vidui because if you fulfilled all your obligations, that means you're capable of doing even more mitzvahs. And therefore it's called vidui. And the parsha Vidui Masros is in the 14th chapter of Devarim, Miktzei Shalosh Shanim, Totzias Kol Masar, Tuascha B'Shana Hi, etc. And the Mishnah in the 5th parak of Masechet, he Ketzad Haya Biur, and the Mishnah says he gives the Truma to the Kohen, Trumas Maser, and then he gives Maser Rishon to the Levi, Maser Ani to the Ani, Maser Sheni takes to Yerushalayim, etc. So the recitation of Vidui Maser could be fulfilled in any language, assuming he understands that language. Next we have Kriyat Shema, 3 parshios that we're required to read daily. Tefillah is the Shmon Esrei Brachos. Birkas Hamazon, all these were takonos of Anshe Knesset Gedola, Shmon Esrei, Birkas Hamazon, and yet they can be recited in any language. Next we have Shvuas HaEdus and Shvuas HaPikodon. So Shvuas HaEdus means I know you have Edus for me, and I demand that Edus. You deny that you have testimony on my behalf, and I impose a Shvu on you, and I obligate you through the Shvu to come to Beis Din and testify. And I could be mashpia you in any language. And if a person is a litigant who sues someone for financial payments, and that person refuses to pay because he says, well, I paid you up, or I never took it from you. So under certain circumstances, the defendant has to take an oath, and that oath could be taken in any language. Now the Mishnah goes on to those recitations that require Lashon Kodesh. Ve'elu ne'emar b'Lashon HaKodesh. They cannot be fulfilled in any other language. Mikra Bikurim, when a person brings his Bikurim to Yerushalayim, and after the Kohen does what's called Tnufa on the Bikurim and places the Bikurim on the Mizbeach, this is, of course, the outer Mizbeach, the Bailim then take the Peros into their hands, and they recite an entire parsha, which is called Vidui Bikurim, Mikra Bikurim, and that is the parsha in Kitavo in Dvarim Perkov Vav ve'anisa v'amartu l'fnei Hashem Elokecha Arami Ovid Ovi. We're familiar with this parasha from the night of the Seder. And we should emphasize the word ve'anisa because, as we'll soon see, whenever the Torah says ve'anisa, it means Lashon Kodesh, Dafka Lashon Kodesh. V'chalitza. This is a parasha in Kitetze, in which the brother of the late husband who died without children refuses to be miyabim his sister-in-law, and then she has to recite a pasuk of Mein Yevami Lahakim Liachiv Shem B'Yisrael Aviyabmi. The choletz, the yavam, he has to respond by saying Lo Chafatzi Lekachta. And then the Yavama does chalitza on the nal of the choletz of the Yavam, and she spits in front of him. At that point, she says, so all these statements and recitations have to be done in Lashon Kodesh. Now the Mishnah goes back a little bit in history to brachos uklos. This is Har Eval and Har Grizim. After the Jewish people crossed the Jordan River and entered into the land, they built a Mizbeach, and at these 2 points, meaning between Har Grizim and Har Eval, the Leviim recited brachos and klolos. Brachos for those who fulfill the mitzvahs, and klolos for those who violate the mitzvahs. And at that point, Klal Yisrael was makabel on themselves the entire Torah with an olah and a shvuah. And the entire recitation, the nusach of the brachos and the klolos, has to be in Lashon Kodesh. Obviously, the question is, my dahava hava. Why is the Mishnah telling me something about once was in history? But as we'll soon see, brachos and klolos becomes paradigmic, and we derive from it many, many different cases in which we have to recite in Lashon Kodesh. Birchas HaKohanim, right, the 3 psukim of Birchas HaKohanim, when the Kohen is Mevarach Klal Yisrael, they have to be said B'Lashon Kodesh. Birchas Kohen Gadol, after the Kohen Gadol finished his avoda, he entered into the Azorah, he read the Torah, he made a bracha of a seder that consists of 8 brachos, and this was a takana of the Anshe Knesset Gadol. These brachos have to be recited in Lashon Kodesh. Parshas HaMelech, we're talking about the 8th year in the Shemitah cycle, and we're talking about Motzi Yontif Rishon Shel Sukkis, and we have a mitzvah of Hakil. In that mitzvah of Hakil, the Melech, the Yisrael, has to read Parshios from Sefer Dvarim, and that recitation, that reading, has to be in Lashon Kodesh. Parsha Segla Rufa, when a slain body is found between 2 cities, they do an Arifas Egla in the city that's closest to the slain body. That after they do a Medida, and after the Arifa of the Eglas Bakar, the Siknei Ha'ir have to recite a pasuk, Yodenu lo shofchas adom zeveinu lo ro kaper liamcha Yisrael shapradisa, etc., etc. And this has to be recited in Lashon Kodesh. Meshuach bolcham b'shoshem medaber la'am. There was a special Kohen who was anointed with Mashiach. His job was to talk to the people before they went out to Milchama. And this is a parsha in Dvarim Perek Chof, Shema Yisrael, Atem Krevim Hayom LeMilchama Levechem, Al Yerach Levavchem, Al Tiru, V'al Tachpzu, V'al Tartzu, B'pneihem, etc., etc. This has to be recited in Lashon Kodesh. And now the Mishnah itself goes into greater detail regarding this list. And on the list, amongst those amiros that have to recite Lashon Kodesh, the first on the list is Mikra Bikurim, Ketzad. Ketzad means what's the source from which we derive the conclusion that Mikra Bikurim must be read in Lashon Kodesh. And the Gemara quotes the pasuk V'Anisa. We have to emphasize the word V'Anisa V'Amarta L'fnei Hashem Elkecha Rami Ovid Ovi. And now we spoke about Brachos Uklolos, our Hagrizim our Evel. That is the paradigm for the requirement of Lashon Kodesh Dafka. And Lahalanu Omer with regard to Brachos Uklolos, the Dvarim Perek Chav Zayin, it says V'Anu Alavim V'Omru. So we have again Aniyah in both Mikra Bikurim and in Brachos Uklolos, and that generates a Gzeira Shava, from which we derive Mala Halon, just like in the case of Brachos and Klolos, B'Lashon Kodesh. The Gemara later on at Daf Lamed Gimel is going to derive that the Brachos and Klolos Hagrizim Ha'ezel were recited in Lashon Kodesh. Afkan, here too in Mikra Bikurim, B'Lashon HaKodesh. Chalitza Ketzad, from whence do we derive the conclusion that the Yavam and the Yavama, when they have this respective and reciprocal readings, it has to be in Lashon Kodesh, because again, the pasuk says V'Ansa V'Amra, the same word V'Ansa. Ulahalanu Omer, and in Brachos and Klolos, it says V'Anu Alavim V'Amru, Malahalon, just like in the case of Brachos and Klolos, Lashon HaKodesh, which again we're going to derive later on, is Afkan B'Lashon HaKodesh. So to Chalitza requires Lashon HaKodesh. Rav Yehuda Omer, I agree with the din, but I don't even think we need to derive this din regarding Chalitza from Brachos Uklolos. But rather, he says, V'Onsa V'Omra Kacha. The word Kacha means this is the way she has to say it. Ad Shetomer B'Lashon Hazeh, she has to recite it the way it's written in the parsha in Lashon HaKodesh. Brachos Uklolos Ketzad. What exactly was the seder that took place there when they crossed the Yarden? Kemitcha Avru Yisrael Sayarden Ubo El Har Grizim El Har Evel Shebeshomron. So there was a neighborhood called Shomron, which we have even today, and we know it Shechem is in Shomron. Shebetzad Shechem Shebe'etzel Elone More. So these mountains were very close to the city of Shechem, which was in Elone More. And that's a lashon of a Meshar. And even though the word and the name of the city Shechem is not mentioned in the Parsha Brachos Uklolos, but we know that Elon Moreh is mentioned, and we know that Elon Moreh is Shechem. Shenemar, in the Parsha Brachos Uklolos, it says in Dvarim Perek Yud Aleph, Halohema, the Evar Yarden, and the Gemara doesn't quote the Mishnah doesn't quote the entire pasuk, but it says Achrei Derech Mafo Hashemesh Be'eretz HaKnani Yosheb Arava Mula Gilgal Eitzel Elonei Moreh. Ulahalanu Omer, and we're going back to Avram Avinu, and it says by Avram, Vayavor Avram Ba'aretz, Ad Makom Shechem Ad Eloni Moreh, Elon Moreh. So Malahalon Elon Moreh Ha'omer Lahalon B'Shechem, just like by Avram Avinu, Elon Moreh is Shechem. So too, Af Elon Moreh, Omer Khan in the Parsha of Brachos Uklolos, the intention is Shechem. Elon Moreh is Shechem. Now, Shisha Shvatim Olu L'Rosh Har Grizim, Shisha Shvatim Olu L'Rosh Har Evel. The Shvatim were divided into two, 6 on Har Grizim. They included Shimon, Levi, Yehudi, Sachar, Yosef, Binyamin. And there were another 6 Shvatim on Har Evel. That's Reuven, Gad, Asher, Zvulun, Dan, and Naphtali. Makonim Leviim, the Konim Leviim are in the middle between these two mountains, the Aron, and the Aron, which contains the Eidos Habris, Omdim lamato be'emtza. They're down in the valley between the two mountains. Hakonim makifin es ha'aron. The Kohanim were stationed around the Aron. V'Leviim es haKohanim. The Leviim were the second circle around the Kohanim, and Kol Yisrael mikan u'mikan. And Kol Yisrael were on the top of the two mountains, or at least towards the top of the two mountains. Shenemar Kol Yisrael's Kedim. Now we quote a pasuk Yoshua. V'shotrim v'shoftim omdim mizeh u'mizeh la'aron. Hafchu pneim klape hargrizim. The Leviim turned towards hargrizim u'pasku b'bracha, and they recited the bracha Baruch Ha'isha shelo yaseh pesel u'masecha. And apparently the Shvatim on both sides, on both mountains, were able to hear the Leviim, and therefore elu ve'elu onim ame. So the entire Klal Yisrael responded Amen to the brachos. Now hafchu pneim klape har eval. The Leviim now turned towards har eval, upaschu b'klola, to curse those who violated the Torah. Ora isha sheyase pesel masecha, ve'elu ve'elu onim amen. And once again, the Shvatim on both mountains would respond Amen, ad shegomrim brachos uklos. And that's the Seder, and they concluded the brachos uklos. Now we're ready to build a mizbeach, so they bring stones, which they took from the Yarden, and that's based on the tzivui of the Torah. Ubanu es hamizbech. They built a mizbech on Har Eval. Now, Har Eval, if you recall, was the mountain where they cursed the Jewish people. So I guess to sort of offset that orur, they dafka built a mizbech on Har Eval. V'sadu b'sid, and they plastered it. The Kosvov is called Divrei Torah b'shivim lashon. There are 70 nations of the world, and they translated the Torah into 70 languages and engraved it on these stones. Shenemar be'er heite. Now, when I learned this on Shabbos, I got stuck because Chazal tell us, I believe it's a Gemara in Tainis, that on Asar B'Teves, or let's say a day or two before Asar B'Teves, the Torah was translated into Greek. And that was a terrible day. It was really a fast day. But here it seems that the Torah was translated into 70 languages. Maybe it wasn't made accessible to the nations of the world. I don't know. But, one might ask, if it wasn't made accessible to the nations of the world, so what was the point of this exercise? Shenemar be'er heitev. Okay, the Mishnah only quotes the last two words, but the beginning of the pasuk says, "V'chasavta al avonim es kol divrei Torah azos be'er heitev." And be'er heitev seems to indicate that the nations of the world can understand. And then they brought in the Mizbeach Olos U'Shlomim. Maybe here's the answer to my question. He quotes the Meiri, who says, Liachkach Sasru. We'll see it also in Rashi. B'notu es havanim, ubo, and here on the top of Lamed Beis Lamed Beis, v'lanu bimkoman. No, that's not going to answer my question, because the Mishnah is telling me that near the Yarden, there was a place called Gilgal, and they transferred the stones over to Gilgal, and therefore they rebuilt them in that makom.